Welcome to DBL. We are starting today with some new details in the investigation into Matthew Perry's death. And of course, to help us understand it all, we are joined by our one and only Dr. Coley. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Coley. Now, just in case you missed it, because we did talk about this a little bit yesterday, 5 people were arrested, including 2 doctors, a live-in personal assistant, an acquaintance, and an alleged drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen. They allegedly conspired to provide Perry with the ketamine that caused his accidental overdose last year. Now, we're learning that Perry's assistant gave him at least 3 shots of ketamine on the day he died, including the one that killed him. According to authorities, Perry began using ketamine as a legitimate medical treatment. Here's what the administrator for the DEA said on the Today Show.
He started receiving treatment for anxiety and depression. And at some point, he needed or wanted a higher dosage that the doctors would not provide. So at that point, he sought out other doctors. And it's part of the tragedy of this case that doctors are in a position of authority and trust, and these 2 doctors violated that. They saw him as a payday.
They saw him as a payday. Jeff, you're shaking your head. What do you think of these new details before let's all discuss before we put our medical hat on, Dr. Coley?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things going on. Number one, this isn't just a problem in the Hollywood Hills or Hollywood itself or the United States or around the world. It's a problem everywhere, but we're focusing on this one thing. And we're giving Matthew Perry here, and I'm not trying to blame the victim in this case, but a lot of leeway here. Because had he not had the drug addiction in the first place, we wouldn't be in this ring. But unfortunately, it doesn't stop with Matthew Perry. There's rings all over Hollywood, all over the country. This is abusing and ruining the United States as it is. But I don't know, we lean on pharmaceuticals so much. In this case, I don't know if you consider ketamine a pharmaceutical, but we're so heavily reliant on pharmaceutical industry that, I have a panic attack. Well, here's some pills. Take that. I have a little bout of depression. Well, here's some more pills. Take that. I've gone through panic attacks. I've gone through bouts of depression. I've gone through it all, but I've gotten out of it in my own way. I've done my research. I've read books, and I've always combated that with exercise or something else. Today, the answer is, for a 10-year-old kid, my kid's not focused in school. Well, let's medicate him. That's not the answer. And I'm not saying this is what's going on with Matthew Perry, but drugs are a huge problem. And it starts with the pharmaceutical company and breaks down into drug dealers and drug rings all over the United States.
And I think it's finding that middle, because drugs can be life-saving for the right person. I know.
Of course, I'm talking generalities, and that's the argument, is coming back at somebody saying, well, my uncle needs this. I understand your uncle needs that. But we can't even have the conversation in America anymore.
Right, yes. But I just need to include that, because for me, it was life-saving.
Yes.
So, Dr. Coley, I want to know your opinion when it comes to these doctors who are allegedly profiting off of his addiction.
Sam, don't call them doctors.
Okay.
They are not doctors.
Yep.
Yes,
these people are criminals.
Monsters.
And to Jeff's point, there are criminals like this in the medical field all over the country. We picked up on these couple here. One was an ER doc and one was an urgent care doc. What do they have any business having access to ketamine, which a psychiatrist should be giving? And they took an oath. They took an oath to protect people, to cure disease, and instead they're taking advantage of a disease. And Jeff, I agree with Sam. I think there's a spectrum.
For sure.
There are individuals that can get over it without medications. And ketamine is really for treatment-resistant depression and addiction, where everything else has failed, and that depression is a threat to your life. And that's when we would think about reaching for this kind of a medication, even then in only very low doses. And I'm not surprised to hear that he needed more and more of it, because you get tolerance to this medicine over time, and you get a psychological dependence. And so putting tolerance and dependence together means you're basically trading one addiction for another, an opioid addiction or alcohol addiction for ketamine.
Just so you guys know, the attorney for Placentia has written back and said this certainly didn't rise to the level of criminal misconduct. His only concern was to give the best medical treatment and to do no harm. That's the lawyer coming from the doctor who, by the way, we read the text message that said, how much is this moron going to end up
And he's
paying
an urgent care doctor. What business does he have writing ketamine? He is outside his lane there, and I feel like he's a mark on the medical profession.
I think in order to have this conversation, and Jeff and Sam, you guys were it seems like you were having 2 different conversations. Sam, you were saying the medication you were given was life-saving. Jeff, you were saying that, you found a way to circumnavigate.
No, I know what Jeff's saying. He doesn't want everybody who's in Jeff's boat to get the easy way out, when in reality, you may not need medication. I fully understand what Jeff's saying. I just had to say, from my perspective, what I've experienced, but I understand everything.
And what I was saying was both of what you were saying was so valid.
Right, but in some case, when you're like, America has a problem with obesity, maybe we should work out more. I'm a bad guy for saying let's work out. But if you take opioid or whatever it is, these new injections, you're the good guy. I don't think that's the right thing, but America thinks that's the right thing. And if you're delivering the message to do the right thing by not putting these things in your body, you're the bad guy. I don't understand how it's flipped.
Well, because it's a very individual decision. There's some
With
people,
the right doctor.
Right. There are some people that are almost like exercise they find it almost impossible to lose weight. Some people like yourself can set your mind.
Again, a spectrum.
Right. It's just, like you said.
But they're
it's a
both
spectrum.
the right. I got it.
Yeah,
They're both acceptable.
And so,
But they're not.
And I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, what we have is a situation where we have people that are relying on medical advice, and when you have physicians in a position like they were in the early aughts, and here we are in 2024 in a position to help render aid, and they over distribute to that medication. Here we are 15, 20 years later with a group full of addicts, and we are now trying to go back and retroactively figure out what happened.
Well said. Okay, so because we have Dr. Coley here, we got to ask you this, Dr. Coley. We're also learning more about this so-called ketamine queen. So TMZ reports she was really into the mafia and even created her own website paying tribute to the life of organized crime. She's facing 9 charges, including conspiracy to distribute ketamine, and has pleaded not guilty. As part of the investigation, authorities raided her house following Perry's death. Here's what they said that they found. Watch.
Matthew Perry's death was last fall, and then we did a search warrant earlier this year, and she was still running a drug emporium. There were 79 vials of ketamine, more than 1,000 pills that are essentially methamphetamine. Yeah. So she was a significant drug trafficker. And again, we also have now been able to connect her sale of ketamine to an individual, Cody McLaury, who died in 2019. So she's a significant source of supply in Los Angeles. And again, Matthew Perry got to her after starting with the unscrupulous doctors and then turning to the streets.
Okay, Dr. Coley, lots to talk about here, but ketamine. Talk to us about ketamine and treatment for it.
I mean, ketamine is an anesthetic. It's been around for decades, since the 1960s. It was used in the Vietnam War in the 70s out in the field. In the 80s and 90s, people realized, oh, it's a hallucinogen, right? It makes you have this dissociative out-of-body experience. So that's when the kind of abuse and the raves and the special K started to emerge. But then in the early 2000s, they saw that it actually works in low doses for depression. But again, in a monitored setting. So in 2019, the FDA gave it a go-ahead for nasal spray of ketamine for treatment-resistant depression that doesn't respond to anything else. But it's really cool. What it does is sort of resets your brain. It hits like a reset on it, uses different chemicals than our usual antidepressant treatments, and we can start to see effects within minutes to hours with ketamine.
Do you think this is going to set that treatment back? Because if there are other drug companies that are like, this new ketamine is really blowing us out of the water in the market, can they use a story like this to say, hey, we told you guys ketamine's a street drug, get rid of that and now take this?
I'm hoping it doesn't, Al, because it's really effective. But having said that, it's effective in small doses, very little bits.
With the right
monitoring, right?
Yeah,
it can cause cardiovascular stimulation. It can cause bladder problems. It can cause cognitive deficits if used in the long term. This is not a recreational drug. This is a very, very, very specific medical treatment for a very small percentage of the population.
Well said, Dr. Coley. We so appreciate you being here. Coming up on, yes, and you too, Dr. Jackson. Ouch. Dr. Coley.